Wednesday night Bible study, and I am always excited to start a new series. Tonight we're going to be getting into the life of Christ, a journey through the Gospels. And boy, my goal is to do a couple of things. First of all, I recognize that those in this room, those listening online, when it comes to Bible material, the life of Christ has to be some of the most well-known material for a Christian, as should be the case. If you're a Christian, a follower of Christ, and Christ is your Savior, then I hope you know Him and know Him well. And so there's always a balance of not just teaching everything that everyone has known since they were a 5-year-old in Sunday school. But having said that, there are some that never went to Sunday school at 5 years old. There are some who have been saved recently. Maybe the Sunday school they went to didn't teach about Christ. And so maybe some of the things that we know about Christ aren't commonly known by others. And so you don't want to overlook those things. But on the other side, nor do you want to teach a Sunday school level, elementary level lesson on Christ for those adults who've known Christ, been saved most of their lives, and want to go deeper. And so my goal is to provide both. That in the lessons of the many months, and this will probably take most of the year 2022 to go through all 4 Gospels. Now, I am not going to teach through Matthew and then back up and teach through Mark, and then back up and then teach through Luke, and then do so with John. We're going to go through all 4 of the Gospels together at one time, referred to often as the harmony of the Gospels, because that's exactly what you're seeing. The Gospels do not contradict each other. It is not one Gospel's account taken above another Gospel's account. It is all 4 Gospels harmonizing together, like a song where you've got the melody and you've got others singing and playing the different parts of a song. And when they all do their part, the music can be beautiful. And so when you look at all 4 Gospels together, it is a beautiful song that you are reading about the life of Christ. And so we'll look at all 4 together. When we read about a miracle or a parable, we're going to see I know why, Christian. We're going to see what each gospel account brings to the table. And when you look at all 4 of the accounts, look at all 4 of the miracles and the way that the miracles are presented, when you look at the parables, when you look at the teachings of Christ and see how some gospels emphasized a certain teaching of Christ and others chose to emphasize another part of that teaching, sometimes in the same message, and you take all the parts together, you get a fuller view of what Christ actually taught at the Sermon on the Mount, or what he taught at some other location throughout his ministry, rather than just bits and pieces of what one gospel account chose as what they thought was a priority. Now, I want to conclude with this before we get into the Bible study. And when I say what they thought, obviously the penmen are just tools in the hands of God, and I don't believe that God robotically used the penmen where they kind of went into a trance, closed their eyes, and just wrote, and then opened their eyes, and there was the words on paper. I do believe that God inspired these men who essentially gave themselves fully over to the filling of the Holy Spirit, not a possession. It's not some type of ghostly experience, but definitely a spiritual submission to God. I am completely open to what you want me to say, what you want me to write. Please place it in my head, place it in my heart. There are those who believe, and I am definitely one of them, that there are definitely parts of Scripture, can't argue that in entirety of Scripture, but parts where God literally just spoke the words and the penman just wrote what they heard. We know this because Moses and multiple prophets literally say, "Thus saith the Lord," meaning God said this, and I'm just telling you verbatim what God told me. I'm just passing on the information. Now, not all of the books of the Bible, not all of the penmen clarify the phrase, "Thus saith the Lord." So I can't claim dogmatically that every penman wrote what God spoke to them, although I can say that for some. With the Gospels, we don't have the phrase at all written in reference to the penman saying, "Thus saith the Lord." Some of the penmen were there with Christ. Some heard from others, but I believe all 4 heard from God in some manner. God spoke to them in some way, and they wrote what God intended them to write. And I believe word for word. I don't believe it was a general idea. I don't think God placed in their heart, all right, write about my life. Now you got freedom from here. No, I believe God gave them the inspiration to write it and the inspiration what they should write. So essentially, the Gospels are an account of 4 penmen, but ultimately, God's account of his son's life for our benefit. All right, before you get into the Gospels, I kind of want to give you an overview of each Gospel and what they represent. Now, Matthew might be one of the most well-known themes. When you think of Matthew, even the title slide I got here, a crown, it's well known that Matthew is presenting Christ as essentially the king. Now, all 4 Gospels represent Jesus as God. All 4 represent him as the Messiah, but they kind of emphasize a particular quality of Jesus while he walked this earth. And so Matthew, being the first of the 4 Gospels listed in our Bibles, by the way, according to church history, not the first written. Most theologians, most historians believe that it was Mark that was the first gospel written, and then Matthew would have followed shortly after it. Luke being the last one, Luke written by the physician Luke, and then many believe that the apostle John wrote his gospel either somewhere before Luke or somewhere right after Luke, but usually in the order of Mark, Matthew, John, and then Luke. All right, so Matthew, being the gospel that represents Jesus, the Messiah as king, of course, written by the apostle Matthew. And they say, wait a second, I thought his name was Levi. Well, he had Matthew and Levi. So 2 of the Gospels refer to him as Levi, 2 refer to him as Matthew. Same guy, 2 different names. He was essentially the tax collector. Now, consider this. Tax collector, of all 12 apostles, might have been the least liked, at least as he entered in initially. He was the guy that the Jews would have seen as a lying cheat who was a lapdog to the Romans, who gave up his country for money. Because essentially that's what tax collectors did. They were despised by the Jews. I mean, to imagine as a Jew thinking, yeah, I'm a fisherman, I'm a man of the earth, yeah, I'm just a regular guy, I'm just a follower of John the Baptist, and now I'm a follower of Christ. And then to be part of this group and to see that Jesus would call Matthew the tax collector must have been a blow to their pride. Right, because they're thinking, we're an elite group of the common man, right? Like, here we are. People look at us, and our heads are held high. We're following the master. We're following the teacher, and people must envy us. And then he chooses Matthew, and then they start to reconsider, what is our group anyways if Matthew can be part of this group? If Jesus can include a guy like Matthew, then maybe we're not so special. I wonder if some of their pride was lowered when Matthew joined them. But then it goes further. Matthew ends up being only one of the few apostles that actually writes a gospel. Now, not many of the apostles of the 12 even write any of the inspired New Testament books. Of course, we know Peter. We know the apostle John writes the Gospel of John. But the other 2 gospels, Luke and Mark, aren't written by the apostles. So of the 12 apostles, only 2 of the apostles are actually given, you might say, the authority and the responsibility to give the account of Christ's life, and one of them was Matthew, the tax collector. A guy that was an outcast by his own choice. I mean, he chose his job, and he chose to steal from his fellow Jews, but even so, an outcast. And God says, well, you can be an outcast in my group, and then I'll let you write the book of Matthew to tell others of the change I brought to your life and to the lives of others. Matthew is that tax collector that the Bible tells us in the Gospels, we'll see this story later, where when he does choose to follow Christ, he invites Jesus and the other apostles to his house, has a party, and it is Matthew who says, I'm going to give half of what I have back to the people. I mean, a true conversion experience. Change like immediately. So he presents Jesus as the Messiah, the King. Now, his narrative's a little dry. I'll tell you why it's a little dry. Because his target audience was the Jews. And boy, Jews love their history. They love their genealogies. And in fact, the book of Matthew starts off with the genealogy of Christ. So when we read it, like, we skip the genealogies, like boring, right? And you go past it, and you want action. Oh, man, the Jews eat that up. Okay, who is this Jesus guy? Does he deserve to even be called a Jew? Who's his dad? Who's his father, grandfather, great-grandfather? We want to know everything about this guy. And Matthew says, don't worry, I got you covered. Now, consider this. Matthew's personality as a tax collector, probably very meticulous, right? Black and white personality. He's a money guy. I got to tell you, I love math, but I'm going to be honest, I'm not a mathematician by nature. I just like math. I like how numbers work. I look at them more as like riddles and things like that. But if you meet an actual math person that doesn't just like love math because, you know, math can be fun, it's like everything to them is math, they are extremely black and white people. Now, they make the best bookkeepers. They make the best finance or advisors. They're the best person to go to for a budget, but they're not usually the life of the party, usually, right? So that's Matthew. He's a budget guy. He's a money guy. So if God's going to call anyone to give a meticulous account, the details that really matter, what we would call boring details, but very important to the Jews, if he's going to ask anyone to write an account of his life to the Jews, Matthew's the guy. So here's my point. What a lot of people see as weaknesses. Oh, Matthew. You don't invite Matthew to a party, right? This party's boring, man. Yeah, he gives away free money at the end, but that's the only good part. Don't invite Matthew. I mean, he's just, everything's about numbers with him. And there's no gray area with him. And whereas a lot of people would say, Matthew, yeah, not really interested in being with friends with a guy like Matthew. God says he's the perfect guy to give an accurate account of me. And I love that, how the human condition often sees weaknesses, and God says, no, that's a strength right there. The human condition often rejects people for the very thing that God says is what I've been looking for. And so, Christians, let me encourage you this. First of all, if you feel like there's a weakness in your life, I'm not talking moral weakness, I'm not talking sin. But what you feel might be a weakness that others see is just not a powerful part of who you are, reconsider. God might be seeing that differently. So Matthew's narrative, driven by Jewish tradition, often referring to things in a way that Jews would see as important, giving background information that we as a Gentile, even back then Greeks would have said, now why would you include that? I really don't care about that. Well, yeah, exactly, but it's written to the Jews. Not that you can't benefit from it, not that you can't learn from it, but it wasn't intended for you. You're not the intended audience. That's why, of the four Gospels, Matthew is probably the one least read. Usually when I tell someone to read one of the Gospels, I literally say don't start with Matthew. I actually say go to John or go to Mark. Those are the two I usually tell them to go to, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I actually warn people, if they're reading the Bible for the first time, I actually say don't start with Matthew, even though it's the first book in the New Testament. All right, let's move on. You got the Gospel of Mark. Now, I've already stated, this is Mark, as in John Mark, as in the young man who was a fellow missionary of the Apostle Paul and Barnabas. Like Matthew, he had his own mistakes, and unlike Matthew, John Mark was set up for success. We don't know Matthew's backstory before he became a tax collector. We can make assumptions all day long, but it's kind of a futile effort. We don't have to make assumptions about John Mark. Let me tell you his backstory. He had a mother who was a very godly woman, so much so that she is mentioned multiple times in the gospel account, as well as the book of Acts. In fact, she seems to have been a close friend of the Apostle Peter, so close that we're told that when Peter, in the book of Acts, was imprisoned and then released, where did Peter go first after his release? The angel let him out of prison. He went to John Mark's house. He was so well known there that we're told that the servant, who was not John Mark's servant, but the mother, she's a godly woman, friend of Peter, that she, when she said, who is there, Peter, just him speaking, she recognized who Peter was just by his voice, not because he said, this is Peter. That's how often he visited the house. The servants knew him by his voice. So John Mark's family closely associated with the apostles, specifically Peter. In fact, some theologians believe it was John Mark's mother's house where the Last Supper was held. Now, there's no proof in Scripture of that, but it could be very likely when you find Peter went there first, a very big house, and well known with the apostles and a stopping point in Jerusalem. So very likely that's the case. John Mark, having all these connections in Jerusalem, of course, knew Barnabas, who was a leader in Jerusalem. And when Barnabas wanted to go on his first missionary journey with Paul, he says, let's bring John Mark. Comes from a strong, solid Christian family. His mother's a godly woman. They knew Jesus personally. Peter's like besties with the mom and with John Mark. Let's bring him along. I'm sure. Can you imagine? The mother's heart must have just been on cloud 9. Oh, John Mark's going to be a missionary for the Lord. It's what I've always wanted. And then a couple of months into it, John Mark comes home and says, hey, Mom. She's like, what are you doing back home? Well, Mom, it was a little hard. College was hard, Mom. It wasn't what it was cracked up by what I thought it would be. And I missed home. I missed you. And, I missed all of the opportunities I had here, Mom. And so I think I'm just going to take a break, from a life and going to reevaluate everything. Oh, I don't know how John Mark's mom responded to that, but I got to tell you, my impression of people that I've known over the years, I envision John Mark's mom as a strong, sweet, but strong woman. I'll tell you why. You ready? She was friends with and respected by Peter. That's all you need to know about John Mark's mom. If you know anything about Peter, you know what you need to know about John Mark's mom, all right? Peter's not the guy that's going to respect a weak, docile woman. So she had to be like a powerhouse. And I kind of see her as like the matriarch of the family, overseeing everything. Oh, I bet John Mark got a tongue lashing when he came home early from that missionary journey. But then, whatever was said, maybe John Mark's mom, we know that Barnabas eventually took John Mark under his wing again. In fact, it was that decision to give John Mark a second chance. But by the way, you ever wondered, was it John Mark or was it John Mark's mom again, right? I think she's kind of like the shadow of the story here that maybe convinced Peter, give him another chance. Come on, you know he's a good boy. Can you see a mom doing that, right? And so in whatever condition, another way, John Mark was given another chance by Barnabas. Oh, Paul was furious. Now remember, Paul was not connected to this family. Paul had no obligation to John Mark's family. Paul didn't probably know John Mark's family from Adam. So John Mark's mom connected with Barnabas, connected with Peter. She had all the ends except for with Paul. Maybe Barnabas was just doing it out of his love for John Mark, maybe out of his respect for John Mark's mom, whatever his reasons. He said, I'm going to give you another chance. The Apostle Paul's like, man, I don't know you. I don't know your mom. You had your chance. You blew it. I'm not taking you again. The argument got so heated, they split. The Apostle Paul went off on his own, took another young man, ended up with Titus and Timothy and Silas, and had some other young men along the way he met, and met Luke, the physician, while Barnabas and John Mark off into the wild blue yonder. We don't hear much about them again. And so John Mark, though, we're told by the Apostle Paul at the end of one of his letters, as he's at the end of his life, he mentions John Mark by name. Hasn't mentioned him in any of his Gospels, hasn't mentioned him in the book of Acts since that split. At the end of the Gospel, at the end of his life, he mentions John Mark and speaks very highly of him, and basically says he's like family to me. So at some point, John Mark came back around, got his act together, and fully committed to the cause of Christ. Now, I hope that's an encouragement to you, because the church is full of John Marks. Come from strong Christian families with strong mothers and strong fathers who basically paved the way of success, right? And say, the path is there. All you got to do is walk on the thing, right? I literally, it's not even gravel. I paved it for you. And here's some new shoes to walk so you don't get sores on your feet. Just move forward. And John Mark's like, it's just kind of hard, And so he kind of comes back home. Oh, the church is full of these guys. Don't worry. John Mark gives a gospel account of Christ, one of only 4 men given the privilege to do so. A young man who lost his way, a young man who, I don't see John Mark turning his back on God, but definitely broke a commitment. A big commitment. Embarrassed his mom, I have no doubt of that. But over time, John Mark turned back to the Lord, and God says, here's the guy I want to use to give a gospel account. Mark. And by the way, great gospel. I mean, all 4, obviously. All 4 are good. All 4 are great. But I love John Mark, by the way. His audience is the Romans. In fact, it is assumed that John Mark wrote this book in his much older age, somewhere in the AD 60s, whatever. He's an older guy. He's not a young man anymore. Experienced older man, looking back at kind of much of his life and the choices that he made, John Mark very likely knew Christ as a boy, teenager. He probably likely met Christ, and Christ ate in his home is I think a very safe assumption. Would not have walked with Christ, would not have gone everywhere with Christ, but he knew Peter very well. He knew the apostles very well. He heard the stories. On top of that, the Holy Spirit inspires him directly. I mean, John Mark's a good guy to write the gospel. You know what's interesting? John Mark, it seems very clearly his audience is the Romans, not the Jews. John Mark's mother was a Jew through and through. She was probably a very well-known Jewish woman. But John Mark chooses to write it to the Romans. In fact, it is believed that John Mark, and this is, again, not scriptural, but assumed by biblical historians, that John Mark actually wrote Mark while in Rome with Peter. And that while Peter's in prison, that John Mark or while Peter's in Rome and John Mark's with him, that this is when God gives him the inspiration to write to the Romans while himself in Rome. So the material, I love this. It is Mark's book is the shortest of all four by a good 8 chapters. I mean, it's not like Mark and then the next book is 2 chapters more. Like the next book is 6, 7 chapters more than Mark. And yet Mark, of the 37 total miracles listed in all 4 Gospels, Mark has 20 of them. Now, Luke has the fewest amount of miracles. I believe it's Matthew that has the most, but Matthew is also the largest book. So just the space. And then, of course, after that, you've got John with I think it's 2 more miracles are listed. I think, I want to say John's 22 or 23 miracles, and then Mark's 20 miracles. But John has 8 more chapters. So when you compare the amount of text to miracles, Mark blows them all out of the water. So the amount of space that Mark uses and the amount of miracles placed in that space, it's miracle, 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 miracle. Mark, his book is a book of action. That's why I love the book of Mark. I'm a man of action. I like action. I like to keep things going. So if you like a narrative that's moving, if you like a narrative that's just here's what Christ did, and then here's what Christ did, and then here's what Christ did, then this is Mark. Now, Mark presents Christ here as a servant. In fact, Jesus Christ, preaches in Mark, and the things that he says refers to himself as a servant. And so I think that this pairs really well with the miracles because Christ is a servant and wants to come serve humanity. What better way to serve humanity than to do miracles? Miracles of healings, miracles of the food, amazing miracles for the benefit of the mankind that Jesus came to serve. So when you think of Jesus as a suffering servant, it's not purely Mark is presenting Jesus as dying on the cross only. Jesus wasn't only a servant on the cross. Jesus was a servant his entire life. Now, the cross was the epitome of his service to mankind. That was the climax. That's what he really came here to do. But if Jesus is a servant, what do servants do? They serve. And so Mark presents this servant. You could kind of say the crescendo of a song, right? It's a powerful song, and you can kind of feel it, getting to that peak, and at the very peak, you're you really got chills when it hits there, but you're the chills are growing as you're getting there. Reading Mark, the chills are growing as you see these miracles. Miracle, 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 miracle. Wow, Jesus is not only the Messiah, and not only is he awesome, but he sure does love people. To serve them in this way, to take time to stop and to say, no, they're hungry, let's feed them. No, he's blind, let's heal him. This person has a problem, let's take care of it. What better way for God to be a servant than to be God and to do miracles in service of the people that he loves? And we serve the same God today. The God of miracles, the servant God who loves to serve, not because he has to, but because he loves you. And this same God's doing miracles even today in his church. That's Mark. If you haven't read it recently, you might want to get back into it and read this action-packed, miracle-filled narrative of the gospel of Christ. Okay, so now we get into Luke. Now, of course, I'm giving them to you as they are given in our King James Bible, in your modern Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Again, not necessarily given to you in the order they were written. All right, so the Gospel of Luke, assumed to be the last gospel by many, written after all the other 3. And, of course, this is written by Luke himself. Now you say, how do you know it's written by Luke himself? Well, I know because in the book of Acts, you read the account of the Apostle Paul as they and them and he, and then Luke comes on the scene, and now it's we and us, right? So Luke's including himself in the narrative when he arrives on the scene. As a humble man, though, he doesn't want to, flaunt his feathers like a peacock, so he just changes the narrative to honesty of now I'm involved, but the narrative of them to us changes when Luke comes on the scene. So it's pretty obvious that the book of Acts is written by Luke. They say, all right, so then how do you know the book of Luke is written by Luke other than the fact that it's given by his name? Well, the book of Luke is referring to a man named Theophilus. In fact, in the book of Luke, in chapter 1, verse 3, Theophilus is greeted. And guess where else Theophilus is greeted? In the book of Acts. So the book of Luke and the book of Acts is one continual narrative. I know our Bible splits them up in two books, but as far as Luke was concerned, it was one story. The book of Luke talks about the life of Christ, and the book of Acts talks about the church of Christ. And you find a very seamless, in fact, the book of Acts kind of gives a quick review of what happened at the end of the book of Luke. It reviews it and then goes from there. So it is likely, and I think not only likely, it is true, Luke did write two separate letters to Theophilus, because in the book of Luke, in Acts, he says now, referring to the previous one that I wrote. So he took a break. I don't know how long to break in between these, but for whatever reason, in his head it was a seamless story, but he told it in two parts and gives a slight review in the book of Acts. But it is most definitely Luke the physician, not the apostle, who was a missionary friend with the Apostle Paul, met him on his missionary journeys, who wrote both Luke and Acts. Written directly to Theophilus, who, by the way, was very likely a chief magistrate. A magistrate being a judge, someone of high leadership authority within a town. You could call him like a mayor, but, in Jewish tradition in those days, a mayor wasn't just a political guy. They called the shots theologically sometimes. If there was an issue between neighbors or an issue of the Old Testament law that had to be handed out, whatever, it would be dealt with by the magistrate. So Theophilus, a chief magistrate, so a higher up, they say, how do you know he's a magistrate and how do you know he's a chief magistrate? Because in neither book is the word chief magistrate mentioned. No, that's true, but in the book of Acts, the phrase that Luke refers to when it comes to Theophilus' name. So actually, I'm gonna read this for you. Not that there's a whole lot of significance, but it is good to know kind of who we're talking about. He says in verse 3, Luke chapter 1, verse 3, he says, "Most excellent Theophilus." All right, that word excellent is not a title you just pass out lightly. He's not complimenting Theophilus on his academic abilities. He's not saying you're a good-looking guy or you're really strong. He's talking about your authority, your excellence as an authority figure. In fact, that word is also given to other authority figures, magistrates specifically, in the book of Acts, including Felix. So we're just kind of connecting the dots here. If this word excellent is kind of like a political title given in the book of Acts to two other guys who were political leaders, magistrates, we can safely assume Theophilus is in the same boat. So very likely a chief magistrate, a guy of really high importance, and Luke's writing directly to him. Now, that tells you a couple things. One, Luke knew the right people. So Luke was the kind of guy that rubbed shoulders with some very high up figures. When Luke went to the party, the politicians made a beeline because Luke is the guy you want to know. I don't think, from what I say about Luke, humble guy, I don't think Luke is seeking them out. Luke just happens to be a guy everyone knows and everyone wants to know because he knows everyone. He himself is a physician. He's not a political figure. He's not a governor. But he's a guy people respect, and he's a guy leaders want to know. And yet, Luke, when he writes about Christ, even though he writes to Theophilus, he's essentially, his broader audience is the Greeks. And when he writes about Christ, he writes about Christ as the Son of Man. What does that mean? Luke writes about God, Jesus, as a man of the people. Now, consider the irony here. Luke knows and rubs shoulders with very important people. Christ, the most important person ever to walk this earth. And yet Luke says, but I want to present him as a God of the common man. That it's not just the Theophiluses who can get saved by Christ. It's not just the Felixes that Christ came to save. It's the harlots. It's the tax collectors like Matthew, my buddy, right? I mean, it's even, yes, the Apostle Paul, who was a very zealous Pharisee, yes, him too, but the low, the down and out, the outcasts. This idea as the Son of Man doesn't mean, and it's not portraying Jesus as something less than God. That's not what the phrase Son of Man is. It is emphasizing the fact that God came to earth as a man, for men, with men, to men, the lowest of men. In fact, if you see and if you read the book of Luke, while similar to Matthew in its narrative, where it's kind of, a little dry, not as much action going on, although there's a lot of miracles. Luke's a bigger gospel, so it's kind of stretched out. There are more miracles in Luke than Mark, but they're further apart, you could say. The narrative is similar to Matthew, whereas I'd say Mark and John are similar. We're fast-paced. Luke and Matthew are slow-paced. Because Luke, again, physician, meticulous, black and white. You're either alive or you're dead. Let me help you, And so he, again, a good guy to write this. But his meticulous account now, so God gives him a meticulous account to the Jews that emphasizes Jewish tradition, that references the Old Testament 50 times plus. And then he gives them he gives the Greeks, the non-Jews, a similar meticulous account, but this one, not for the Jews, doesn't reference the Old Testament nearly as much, and geared towards the Greek mindset. So think of it this way. God gave 4 Gospels. Why? Why would God do that? Because there are people who are very meticulous, and they would read the Gospel of John and say, you know what, not really interested in that. Action-paced, yeah, but not really a whole lot of information. God says, don't worry, I got a gospel for you too. Well, I'm a Jew. Exactly, I got one for you too. Well, I'm meticulous, and I'm a Greek. Done, you got Luke. Well, I'm fast-paced. I don't like the meticulous genealogical account. No problem. I gave you Mark. Well, what about John? I like Mark, and I like all the miracles, but I'm fast-paced when it comes to narrative. I want to know the personalities of people. I love fast-paced relationships. God says, no problem, you got John. You see why God gave 4 Gospels? Because God wanted every type of personality, general personality, to have a gospel that's essentially guided towards their love. The black and white personalities, they love the details. They got one of 2 choices, Matthew and Luke. The fast-paced personalities who either like action, the things that are done, you got Mark. You like action when it refers to interaction with people, you got John. So I hope that clears up why there's 4 Gospels for you. All right, so he refers to Jesus often in his book, the Son of Man. The title is given in the book often as the Son of Man. Jesus calls himself the Son of Man in the book of Luke. And so this narrative is driven by Jesus, by the relationships he has with the broken and sinful people. I love that. Luke, a physician of the human body, the physical body, but he did not let it blind him from what really mattered, the souls of these people. Sometimes we get involved with people, we work with people, and we see their physical conditions so much we forget about the spiritual condition. We lose sight of the soul. We lose sight of the emotions. Luke did not. That was always on the forefront for him. And then John, the Gospel according to John. Now, of course, this is the Apostle John. As I stated, of the 4 Gospels, 2 written by the apostles, 2 not. So the Apostle John writes a gospel. He is also the penman of the book of Revelation. Now, the Gospel John, this, of course, by the Apostle John, and the audience really isn't geared towards the Greeks or the Jews. It's essentially everyone. There's not a whole lot of Jewish tradition and things like that, but a Jew would read John and not be offended, you could say. I mean, there's enough going on there that they could follow the story. But also a Greek who didn't know anything about Jewish tradition could follow the narrative pretty easily. It is also a fast-paced book, although bigger than Mark. And this one refers to Jesus as the Son of God. So when Luke is emphasizing God coming down to earth as a man, John wants to remind you the man Jesus is God. So they play off each other. Again, a harmony. You ever heard someone sing by themselves and weren't overly impressed, but when they sang with someone whose voice complimented them, tears came to your eyes by the melody, by the harmony, by the music that was portrayed? That is the Gospels. And do not, as a veteran believer, only read one account. As I've stated, I would not have a new believer, unless they're a Jew, read Matthew. I wouldn't have them start off with Matthew. That doesn't mean they should never read it. I would have them start with John or Mark. And then as they grew in their maturity, my advice would be read all 4 accounts, and read all 4 either together, as we're going to do together in this group, over the many months, or back to back to back to back, and get a full view of what God is doing and what God did do through the different accounts offered. And so this narrative is driven by theology. All right, what is the most well-known verse, probably both in and outside of church? John 3:16, for God so loved the world. That's John 3:16. There's a lot of theology in the book of John. It's a fast-paced narrative, but fast-paced in theology, like just truth after truth after truth after truth. It's great. Great theological book, great theological gospel. And so there are the 4 given to you, and I hope that's a help to you as you now, I would encourage you as we go through these narratives that you do reread these gospels, and so that as you come in and hear the teaching, you've already read these accounts and can kind of follow along with us. Now we're going to start getting into the individual books, and let's begin with what is found in 2 books, the genealogy. I've already told you most of us skip these, but there are some interesting points to be made regarding these genealogies, so I'd like to make those now. You do find the Messianic genealogy, or the genealogy of Jesus Christ, listed in 2 gospel accounts. The first one you find is in Matthew chapters 1 through 16, and in the second one, Luke chapter 3, 23 through 38. And those 2 accounts are not the same genealogies. So the genealogy you find in Matthew is the family of Christ through Joseph. Now, Joseph is not his father. Stepfather, you could say, at best, if even that, right? So Joseph was the man that God allowed to raise Jesus Christ, the Son of God. But Joseph has no direct connection with Jesus as far as his DNA or genealogy goes. So then why does Matthew give us a genealogy? Because for the Jews, the father of a child was very, very important. And so you know what's interesting? That I love this. In Matthew, we're going to turn there. Turn to Matthew chapter 1. Now you find that in Matthew chapter 1, Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, Abraham begat Isaac. We're basically starting with David, but then backtracking and then going to Abraham. Abraham to David, and then picking back up and going on from there. And so Matthew, again, was just basically trying to prove, hey, the Messiah was promised to come through Abraham and David. So I'm going to give you the genealogy of Abraham and David. So for those of you that doubt his right to the title of Messiah, Joseph, who is the man to oversee him, is a direct descendant of Abraham and David. Now, here's what I love. Turn to the book of Luke. Remember, a harmony, right? What one part plays the melody, the other plays the harmony, and they come together and make a beautiful picture. Now, look at the genealogy in Luke chapter 3, verse 23, and what do you read? Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli. Now, that phrase, son of Joseph, son of Heli, does not mean Joseph was the son of Heli, because if you read the other genealogy, you'll find that Joseph was the son of Jacob in Matthew. So in Luke, Joseph, the son of Heli, should be read as Joseph, the son-in-law of Heli. You say, well, why doesn't the Bible say that? Well, actually, if you look at your Bible, it says, which was the son, and the son is italicized. The Bible actually doesn't claim that Joseph was the direct son. It would actually be written, Joseph, which was of Heli. And in Jewish tradition, it would be okay for Joseph, the son-in-law of Heli, to say that he's of Heli, because he's the son-in-law of Heli, having married Eli, or Eli's daughter, Mary. So basically, Luke is giving us the genealogy of Mary. Well, then why didn't they say Mary, the daughter of Eli? Because the Jews didn't trace genealogy through the moms. The Jews traced genealogy through the dads. And so to stick with Jewish tradition, although technically Mary was the son of Eli, we had to stick with tradition. We're going to mention Mary's husband as being of Eli, of the family, when he married into the family through Eli's daughter, Mary. But here's what I love. If you go down this list, you will find verse 38. the son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, which was the son of God. That although Joseph was not a direct father of Jesus, Joseph is in the lineage of God, as we all are children of God, in the sense of created children of God. And I love how Luke makes that reference. That Adam, the first man created by God, is seen by God as his first son. Adam, the first son of God. That does not mean that all human beings are Christians, all human beings are going to heaven. It means that God sees all of the world as his creation, and in a sense, family, not a spiritual family. To be part of his spiritual family, you must be saved. But God sees you kind of as family because you're his creation. Adam was his first son. And so the genealogy of Mary traced down not just to Adam, but beyond to God. And you also find that, of course, Mary comes from Abraham as well as King David. And so both genealogical accounts give any Jew who's concerned about the authority Jesus had to be the Messiah, at least the genealogical side is taken care of. All right, so those are the accounts in Matthew and in Luke. Now let's move on to the book of Luke chapter 1. We are going to be going through these books chronologically. There are parts of certain books that give a story, and it's much later in the book than a previous one. And for example, the book of Mark, if it only has significantly less chapters, there are only, let's see here, there's only 16 chapters total in the book of Mark. So if there's significantly less chapters, the story that is being told has to be told quicker. And so you might find, for example, a story in the book of Mark that's like in chapter 8, for example, but in Matthew, that same story is in chapter 3. And so I'm not going to be looking at all of chapters 1 through 3 in Mark and then all of chapters 1 through 3 in Matthew. We wouldn't be on track. I'm going to look at the stories as they took place, referencing where they were in the Gospels, and give them chronologically. So essentially, the Gospel accounts begin not with the story of Jesus, but with the story of John the Baptist. Now, that is a very interesting point to recognize, that the Gospel accounts are an account of Christ. So why include John the Baptist at all? Who cares about John the Baptist? I mean, yeah, the guy was a great man. He loved God, but there's a lot of other great people that loved God. Why give John the Baptist so much space? And he got a lot of space for what is essentially a sub-character of the story. Because Jesus doesn't see John the Baptist as that much of a sub-character as you and I might see him. In fact, Jesus speaks very highly of John the Baptist. You're going to see that if we have time tonight. If not, we'll pick it up next week and point that out. There is a lot of text given to the story of John the Baptist, a lot more than you might realize. Just the narrative talking about the announcement of his birth, that alone covers a large portion of the first chapter in Luke. So I'm not going to read, for sake of time, the entire text. I'm just going to tell you now, most of the teaching through the Gospels, I will not be reading the text. We just spend the whole time me reading the Gospels to you. You are old enough to read it on your own. You can read it while I'm teaching. You can read it before. You can read it after. I'm going to be teaching through the text, pulling out verses from the text. And even then, I'll probably paraphrase some verses, read the first part, skip the second part, jump right to the fourth verse. I'll be doing that all over the place. So don't worry. I'm not reading a different Bible than you. We got the same Bible. I'm just teaching through it. I'm not going to read every word from it. All right. So we're in Luke chapter 1, verse 5. There were in the days of Herod the king of Judea a certain priest named Zacharias. Now, of course, this man of the course of Abra, his wife, the daughters of Aaron, her name was Elizabeth. Kind of just giving that this is a pretty big family. This is a good family. This is a solid theological family as far as the priest, a good, strong priestly family with strong priestly lines. And we're told in verse 7 that his wife was barren, had no children, an older woman. In that culture, it was a shame, literally a shame. People would have assumed that there was some kind of sin in your life keeping you from having children. That was the first assumption being made. The shame was twofold. First of all, a family knowing there is no one to carry our name. That's a shame. In a tradition where the name The honor of the name and the carrying on of the name was so important that a woman who could not provide that to her husband would almost think of herself as useless. I'm a useless wife to you. The food I make for you, the times we spend together, the care for your soul is nothing. It's nothing because I can't help you carry on your name. Which opens up our understanding to why it was so important for Sarah. The shame was so deep. She literally told her husband, marry a concubine. Take on a concubine. Take this woman as a second lower wife. Literally take her into your bed just to eliminate my shame. Hard for us, 21st century Americans, to realize this because it would be shameful for a wife to say, have a mistress so you can have a child. That would be shameful. You got to change your thinking from 21st century American to Jewish tradition. It was so, think of the shame being so deep that a woman said, it's less shame for my husband to have a known mistress than it is for him to not carry on his name. Less shame. All right, would you stay married to a man who brought so much shame to your life that he had a known public mistress everyone knew about, and the child you had to actually take care of? Could you live with that shame? Elizabeth had a deeper shame during her times of no child. And she had to face the women at the well carrying their children, and she was shamed. And her husband had to go to the temple, and he was shamed among the men. Can you imagine her joy when that shame is wiped away? In fact, she speaks of that joy. And she speaks of the shame being wiped away. She says, my reproach among women is gone now. Among specifically the women. The women have been shaming me all my married life. They can't shame me anymore. I love that. I love that truth. First of all, what others shame you for isn't shame in God's eyes. You got to understand that truth. Secondly, not all the time, but don't you love it when God says, I don't have to. I don't need to do this because what you view as shame isn't shame. And what the culture says is shameful isn't shameful. But God says, I love you so much, I'm going to remove that shame anyways. Even though I don't need to. It's not a sin problem. It's not a moral problem. The world just has an issue, and they got an issue with you. God says, but don't worry, I'll remove that issue. I love that. He doesn't always do it, but when he does, it sure is cool. Elizabeth surely thought so. Sarah tried to remove her own shame, didn't she? And she said, get a mistress. I'd rather you live publicly with this woman and have her in your bed than live with this shame. Only to realize, you know what? That actually didn't work out so well for me. And then God removed Sarah's shame as well. Eventually, when she was also an older woman, and only then did she realize the truth that when God removes shame, it's really removed. When we attempt to remove shame that, was of no fault to our own, that the world sees as shame, we probably just make a bigger mess of it. And so let's move on with this story. We're told that Zacharias it's his turn to go into the Holy of Holies and to offer incense. Now, this was a very, very important event. In fact, it is likely that this is the only time in his life Zacharias would do this, would never had, and never will again. I mean, there's a line of guys that want to accomplish this event, to go into the deep parts of the temple and to essentially be in the presence of the Lord. In the Old Testament, that was the closest you could get to God, was in that room. And so think Zechariah his whole life. Like, can you imagine, the shame that he felt, him and his wife having no son? On this day, his joy was so high, even that shame was probably non-existent. Like, there was probably, if there was any day in Zechariah's life where the shame of not having a son was forgotten, it was this day. If there's any day where he walked with his head held high because of the honor he was about to experience, it was this day. And it was this day of honor for Zechariah that God said, I'm going to remove the shame. It's in this location where Zechariah feels the most honor and the closest to God that God says, I got a great announcement for you. And yet, to his shame, He didn't believe it, did he? The angel announces the birth of John. And John the Baptist, he actually says, name him John. Give him the name John. We're told in verse 12, when Zechariah saw the angel of the Lord, he troubled, fell upon him. But the angel said unto him, fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard. And thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son. Zacharias was praying for a son. I wonder, was Zacharias praying for a son because he wanted a name or because he wanted to eliminate the shame? Could it have been both? I think likely so. And even though sometimes our prayers may not be the purest, God knows our hearts. And even though I have absolutely no doubt that part of Zacharias' prayer for a son was due to the shame of not having one, not just because he wanted a baby boy, that God said, I'm going to answer it anyways. John the Baptist was going to be born no matter what. That had been prophesied. But God said, I'll choose you, Zacharias, because of your prayers. I'll choose you to bring him into this world. Awesome. Look, God's going to do some amazing things with or without you. I want to be used by God. I don't want to be on the sidelines watching others be used by God. Knowing that God's going to use someone, hey, I volunteer. Use me. Zacharias wanted to be used by God. God said, I'll choose you. The problem was, Zacharias prayed. And then when God answered the prayer, Zacharias said, I don't believe it. Oh, come on, Zacharias. Come on, man. Can we really chide him too deeply, though? How many times have we prayed for something to happen only when it happens? Wow, I can't believe that happened. Why not? Did you not pray for it? Well, we're all men. We're all men of flesh. Even Zacharias, the father of John the Baptist, had the same issue. But he doesn't go without chastisement, does he? The angel tells him there's going to be great joy, there's going to be great gladness. He says, verse 15, for he, your son, not only will carry on your name, right? That's implied because every Jew wanted that. He says in verse 15, he'll be great in the sight of the Lord. He's not going to drink wine or strong drink, be filled with the Holy Ghost, even from the mother's womb. Now, for a priest to hear your son will not drink wine or strong drink, right away it's implied, and it's pretty strongly implied, your son will be the son of a priest who can't drink wine or strong drink, which was a step above, like a commitment above the priestly commitment already. Think of Samson, right? Samson, not allowed to drink, not allowed to have touch something dead, not allowed to cut his hair. Like, he was a step above the standard commitment, was the Nazirite vow. So when the angel talks about John the Baptist taking a commitment a step above, it's kind of like John Mark's mother. We talked about it earlier, like paving the way. I want my son to be successful. I want him to be a leader, just move forward. The angel's pretty much telling Zacharias, your son will be that guy. He's going to be a powerhouse among the priests, which for the Jews was like the best of the best, basically, right? Yeah, like you can't have more honor than the priest. And your son's going to be honored even by the priests. Zacharias should have been feeling excitement overflowing. But instead, he's feeling deep, deep doubt in his soul. He says, verse 16, many of the children of Israel shall return to the Lord their God. He's going to be the guy to bring revival to the Jews, the heart of any good priest. Any good spiritual leader wants their message to bring revival, and the angel says, your son's going to accomplish that. It gets better and better. Verse 7, he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias, or Elijah, which was prophesied. Some Jews believed Elijah would come back. Remember Elijah? It was prophesied in the Old Testament that he would return and in a sense foretell of Christ. And some believe that he would actually return physically to the earth, but that's not the case. He's returning in spirit, not that his soul was reincarnated. That's not what we're saying, but in the same manner and in the same power that the prophet Elijah preached and did miracles. And remember, he's the guy that actually went up to heaven in a fiery chair, right? In the same manner in which God used Elijah, he's going to use John the Baptist. I mean, again, for a priest, that would have been like, wow, can it get any better? All right, so he's going to be the son of a priest. Now, my son, he's going to have that extra commitment, be like a step above. He's going to bring revival. He's going to have the power of Elijah. Oh, wow. Like, I feel the tingling in my toes. That's going to be my son? But again, that's not the response that we hear from Zacharias, is he? In verse 18, whereby shall I know this? Essentially, in 21st century lingo, yeah, prove it. Wow. Very bold. Very bold, Zacharias. Prove it, he says. But I'll give you a reason why I doubt you. I'm an old guy. I'm an old man. And unfortunately, I'm married to an old woman. Things don't work the way they used to. Not sure you can accomplish this, God. Really, then what are you doing in this room? Right? What are you doing in this room if you don't believe I can accomplish that? How dare you burn incense in this of all rooms? How dare you think this a day of honor if you don't think that I can actually accomplish this small thing? And we as Christians, we come to church and we hold our hands high and we say, you're an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns with power from above. And then God says he's going to do something awesome. We say, oh yeah, prove it. I'm not sure you got what it takes, God. How dare you? How dare you doubt the power of our God? The angel is not happy. He says in verse 19, I am Gabriel. I literally stand in the presence of God. How dare you question what I've just told you? My job as an angel is messenger. I literally have one job description. I take what God says and I tell you what God says, and I don't lie about it. You're questioning me, and by questioning me, you're questioning God? Well, that's not going to go well for you. So you won't be able to speak. If you're going to question me with your mouth, you won't be able to use it for 9 months until the day your son is named. You cannot speak. You know the story. Zacharias comes out of the temple. People can see in his eyes something happened in there, which shouldn't be a shocker to a Jew when you go into that location. It shouldn't shock you that something happened in there. But aren't we still shocked today? When you come before the presence of the Lord and you're shocked that something happened. Why are you shocked? You're in the presence of the Lord. Don't be shocked. When you spend time worshiping God, don't be shocked when something amazing happens. That should be status quo. And yet Zacharias, in a very special place, worshiping God, doing something that he will probably only do one time in his entire life, and people are shocked that something happened. These people's view of God is not very high, is it? But again, isn't that the church today? Oh, we talk a good talk. We sing a good song. But do we truly have a high view of God? If we did, we wouldn't doubt like Zacharias. We wouldn't question like Zacharias. And we wouldn't be shocked like the friends of Zacharias when God does something. He can't speak. Sign language, writing things down in some way, he communicates to them, I saw an angel. Amazing things happened. And it came to pass, verse 23, as the days of his administration were accomplished, he departed to his own house, and after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, hid herself 5 months. Now, another gospel account, of course, tells us that Mary comes and visits Elizabeth. We're not going to see that today. We'll see that account with the announcement of the birth of Jesus. But so she's hiding herself 5 months. Thus saith the Lord, verse 25, dealt with me in the days wherein he looked on me to take away my approach among men. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God into a city of Galilee named Nazareth. And now this is going to go to Mary. So we're going to end here. Interesting. As I've stated, I'll end with this. It seems that her first concern was always shame. And her first relief was the elimination of that shame. My reproach is gone. She's not stating, thank you, Lord, that I'll have a son that can carry the name of my husband and that I can raise. Thank you that I'll get to have the family I always wanted. She's not saying thank you that he's going to bring revival to the people and we'll see the power of God that hasn't been seen in literally hundreds of years on my son. Wow, thank you for that. No, it's thank you, I have no more shame. So, we'll end with this. God can and does literally use anyone. I'm not trying to downplay Zacharias and Elizabeth. I'm sure they were godly people. But look, we've just seen this small narrative. They had their issues, right? And God used them. If you are thinking that you got to be some kind of perfect superhuman Christian before God uses you, you're fooling yourself. There's not one in the Bible. Christ is the only one. That's because he's God. They don't exist. God uses imperfect people. God uses people who are so caught up in shame that they kind of lose sight of everything that's important. God still uses those people. Don't be shocked when he does. God even uses the doubters. Don't be shocked when he uses the doubters. God uses those who aren't really fully committed. They're going through the motions of worship, but they don't really have a high view of God. God even uses them. I have seen Christian after Christian after Christian. Oh, it's just like, I guess it's more of those than the opposite. I'll tell you those, the group of Christians who just assume you're being used by God, you must be something special. Oh, God uses you? Like, you literally must be like one of the most purest men I've ever known. Wow. God uses you? Like, are you just, Mary incarnate? I mean, like, whoa. I mean, do your feet even touch the ground? Because God uses you. Our human mind makes the assumption that if God is using you, that you're like a step below the angels. I mean, like just one step below the angels. Everyone else is like 20 steps or 200 steps below the angels. Some even think you might be a step above the angels. Like, that's blasphemy, right? But whatever. Some place you on par with God. You say, Pastor Russ, who would do that? Have you heard of the Catholic religion? When they saint people, like they're putting them up there with God, right? Like Mary is literally on the same level as Christ. They literally pray to Mary, as well as many other saints, as if she had as much access to God the Father as Christ does. Not only is Mary above the angels, she's like level with Jesus himself. Oh yeah, people do that. Well, that's the Catholics. Look, it's not just Catholics that do that. Yeah, all kinds of religions, Baptists, Pentecostals, they all do it. They don't say it as blatantly. I mean, there's not a shrine to the pastor, hopefully, in your home. There's not a picture with candles of his face, when you walk in the door. Oh, but yeah, the pastor, he's an angel from God. He's way up there. Why do they think that? Well, maybe because the pastor told him so. Well, that's a shame. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think they think it because they think anyone that God uses so much must be an amazing person. You haven't read Scripture because God uses some pretty unamazing people. And he uses them for some pretty amazing things. So don't be so foolish as to think you're connecting the dots when you see amazing God, therefore amazing person. No. The more unamazing we are, the more amazing God is for using us. And that's the point. God uses unamazing people because he wants us to realize how amazing he is. Stop putting the glory on the shoulders of the unamazing. All you're going to do is puff them up. And if you puff up the person that's being used by God, you are dooming them to destruction. Because pride comes before the fall. You are literally destroying them. You're cutting the legs out from under them. By lifting them up, God says, great, now I got to bring them down. Thanks a lot, Christian. Look, their own pride is battle enough. Don't make it worse by feeding it. Be grateful that God uses unamazing people and pray to be one of them. Let's pray.